I have to say.
So, folks, now we have half an hour for open discussion. So I think I would invite a few more people to join me. Say, Tom, you want to join?
Sure.
To be able to answer questions. Is Nick here still? Oh, yeah. Nick, you want to sit there and join, or you want to come in the front and join? Okay. So I think, and Bill, so I think we have four of us, so I would ask you guys to, oh. You can hold on to the mic.
You have one, right?
You are, no, you are
I have one
on.
more. I took it off.
But you can put it
You
on.
can put it.
Then Nick.
There should be one more clip.
So we dumped a lot of information on, you this today, and didn't let you ask a lot of questions. So and maybe even half an hour is not enough, but at least there is a half an hour now for you to ask questions. And I think all the key people are here, and there are others in the audience as well.
You can use this
So
one.
it's your time.
I don't know if it works.
So maybe this is a question for Bill, but maybe for all, I don't know. What was the reasoning behind splitting up the technical committee and sort of the release ops committee? The reason I'm asking this is mostly because, like in a vendor, they're usually split apart, right? I mean, at least the ones I've worked in. In Open Daylight, the TSC actually owns the release process, the release cadence and all of that stuff. So I'm interested in what your reasoning was, or why do you think this arrangement is better?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll necessarily be better, but it's what we're going to start with. I don't know why I have.
If you clip it on
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, much better. Thank you. But it gives us, I think, focus to those groups on what their responsibilities are. Honestly, I think that Thomas, Holly, Brian, those guys aren't that interested in doing release process-oriented things. And so let's them focus on what they're good at with the architecture and the base structure. And then for people who are used to running this process, it just gives them a separate team to do that. So they're decoupled. We may find over time that maybe we bring them together. I don't really know, but we're going to start with them being separate. Try to allow each one to focus on what they're good at.
And there is always the interaction, I mean, among all of them, right? The use cases, the release, as well as the technical people. So the interactions is very important, but a lot of the process-oriented stuff that goes into release planning, I mean, just in ONOS for last whatever year or so, what we have observed is the technical people are doing what the development work is doing, but there is some release planning work goes on that is more process-oriented, getting stuff done, and those can be two different.
Yeah, my thought when I saw the structure of it was, that's a pretty good idea, because as you say, the technical folks aren't necessarily release ops.
Okay, any other
One
question?
more thing I wanted to add is, so when you have something for the release, somebody needs to sign off on whether it met the quality. And in some sense, it's better to have an independent set of people who are tracking it long-term and for release, and then sign off saying the acceptance criteria was met, and then it's ready to release. So I think it's something that's separate, so it helps the listener.
Yeah. Anything else on people's mind that you want to talk about?
I have a question.
Oh, please.
So I just want to know what the thoughts on the support model. Now we have the release, right? Of course, it's the open project, but in general, I do hear about the consultant support model going forward.
Did you hear the question? Did everybody hear?
I
So
didn't hear.
what is going to be the support model for ONOS going forward?
So support in terms of code support?
Yeah, for productization and deployment.
So you said deployment. So are you saying the support model for for fixing something wrong in the deployment, is that?
Let's maybe break it into two parts, the support for the core,
Yeah.
and then when we do a deployment, the support for the deployment. Maybe we can break it into two parts.
So sorry, I'm trying to get to a place where I'm not causing this thing to go crazy. Okay, so we have bugs in Jira, and those bugs go through a prioritization process, right? And so we'll fix those based on priority. That particular deployment, we have actually got a couple of people that are deployment focused. Luca is one, Subin's another, and so that team keeps an eye on the things that are important for a particular deployment. On top of that, we'll have we have a support alias, we have the IRC channel, we've got other mailing lists. So
I think that some minimum support will be coming from Open Networking Lab itself, but the whole hope is in an open source project is that the community grows, that more and more other people will step up and start supporting. In fact, I'm so delighted to see in last 4 days that ONOS has been open source. Surprisingly, there are other people that are already starting to answer questions on behalf of ONOS as they are learning. And so it's very interesting, even in 4 days now there are, I think there are at least 4 or 5 people that are answering questions on behalf of ONOS. And ON.Lab team doesn't have to step in right away, others are answering. So I think some of that will happen as we go forward. And if it is a successful project, in fact, that is what should happen. Oh.
I saw one of the slides that you are limited to 8 vendors. Why is that?
Oh no, I think it is not.
So it's the voting limit.
Did you hear the question?
which, you said it was limited to 8 vendors? No, we're not limited to 8 vendors.
I think.
Oh, 8
votes, right.
8 votes per vendor.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Anything else? I mean, we have Nick, Tom, and I think some of them can answer, some tough questions. So I ask some tough questions. We don't ask easy questions.
Any thoughts of the philosophy regarding interoperability, horizontal interoperability of a federated control, different versions, or other controllers and standard schemas or anything like that that can be used to sort of merge the system?
I think as Prajakta showed on her slide, this is an area of interest for 2015, right? We haven't spent a lot of time in those areas, but I personally think that there's going to be a number of different controllers out there, right? And there's going to have to be some way that they can interoperate, right? And so I don't know. I think 2015 is going to be there's going to be some interesting work in that area.
Oh,
Tom, if you click it on it,
It will make less noise, right? Yes, when it's all twisted up, so I'm going to have to make a little more noise before I get there.
So I'm wondering the definition of vendors. I mean, how are we, are, for example, chip companies, Broadcom, and, I don't know, other chip vendors like Intel, are they considered vendors, and how are we planning to influence them?
yeah, I mean, I think Intel is considered a vendor as well. So yeah, so yes, the chip companies in our definition are vendors, and Intel is a member, and we think of them as vendors. So they are not service providers. Oh, Larry?
Well, easy question, but it just occurred to me, have you thought about other customers of these service providers, the Goldman Sachs and the financial institutions and so on? Do they? They're vendors.
So Goldman Sachs is kind of a service provider, right?
They're service
In their own
providers
right.
in a way, but.
Yes, I guess in this context we haven't thought as much about them, but if Goldman Sachs were to step up, I would think of them more as a user or end customer rather than a vendor. And so my first reaction is I would think of a large enterprise, if they were to join, I would think of them as user, and in that context a service provider rather than a vendor. I mean, Nick or...
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
I think, I don't recall who's mentioned that we're gonna have quarterly releases. Obviously, in the service provider space, that's a very frequently release schedule. What's the thought on providing more golden releases that everyone can focus on, that'll be more thoroughly tested, things that we can implement so that we, I mean, because quarterly releases is gonna be, I mean, it's gonna be hard to swallow at that rate.
Great, I'd love to hear somebody ask me to slow down.
I wasn't suggesting that, I'm asking a broader question.
No, it's a really good question. And even though it shows quarterly, there is, with that cadence, we expect that every other release is going to be more on the order of a maintenance release. So we just had a big feature release. We had one in December. One in February, as you saw, is really more about performance and stability and fixing issues, right? And then the one in May will be more feature-oriented. So the feature-oriented releases will be more around every 6 months. And we may end up having a stability line as well as a bleeding edge line. We'll have to see, but yeah. Understand that for this, for service providers, yeah, they need to have a stable base for a while.
Anything else on people's mind? Oh, sure.
It's a simple question for remote to build. What is the exit criteria for your release? Like, your testing pass rate has to be 95% or whatever. Do you have any quantified criteria?
We do actually. So we have, so bugs, we don't want there to be blocker bugs, right? So we can't have blockers. We have to pass, we have a long-running test that tries to accelerate failures by rapidly making a lot of changes to the network. It's called continuous hours of operation, so we expect to run that for 3 to 5 days. All of the other tests we have to pass, and then we look at all of those, and I look at Subin and see how happy he looks. He's our QA director, right? And I look at Luca, see how happy he looks, since he's deployment type guy. And, I don't know, and then we kind of put that together and decide, is it ready or not.
So I think to add to what Bill said, so we do have a set of criteria, but as we open source, we probably have to put more things in there. And I think that will be one of the jobs that the release steering committee will have to evaluate and then see what's missing, because we are expanding it out to a broader community. So we have to be able to prepare to get more things in. There'll be this whole incubation process, for instance, for something coming from outside, which we are doing with one of Huawei's features for the next release. Plus, for each of the features that we build, sometimes the requirements came externally. So to evaluate whether those were met and then they conform to the architecture. So there are a lot of facets that will need to be addressed, and that will be probably one of the things that the release steering committee will take a look at and then enhance as needed.
Can you talk a little bit about the ecosystem of ONOS, where ONOS fits? Where is the core? We say this is a core part, and these are auxiliary parts. So can you, based on the comments that you said that it's good to say no and yes, what's the yes? Where is the core? And where is the fringes that you want to work? And where is what you don't touch? I'm sorry for the question.
Not really. Not really.
So let me try this. Bill, you want to answer this?
Go ahead.
I think when we think of ONOS, right? So we think of ONOS as a network operating system, and so the key function that the network operating system is providing is being able to take the network and be able to provide the network state on top of the northbound abstraction, and then certain API by which applications sitting on the top are able to manipulate that network state and be able to program the thing. So with that definition of network operating system, anything that is in the support of that core function is part of the network operating system, and anything that is kind of in top of it or in addition to that, that at least I would think of that as outside the core. And at least in ONOS, the approach or philosophy has always been that we are building a platform and not building lots of other stuff. I mean, people may build something on top of it, but it is about that core platform that we are building. I know Mark said don't use the word core, but I think that is what ONOS is about.
You'll regret that. Damn forever now.
I know. So that is how I, but any, Bill or project or anyone else wants to answer that question?
No, I think it's perfect, and in fact, we'll probably get enhancements or we will probably get inputs on all of those ends. It's just that it has to stay true to the architecture, and then the architecture has to evolve in any direction. But I think the layers that you laid out sound good.
Do you really think it will stay that way? If I look at other operating systems, if ONOS is an operating system, and we've all had the experience of years of watching computing operating systems, and that is that you have a long-term growth in terms of the abstractions, the frameworks, the things the operating system does for you that you used to have to do in applications. And I would expect ONOS to be no different, right? That the abstractions we see today might look primitive and ludicrous in 3 or 5 years, right? Because we'll have high-level SDN languages to deal with in that time frame. And some of the applications that we think about right now on ONOS may become modules or things that are daemons in such an operating system in the future. So I think there is sort of a gray area. What's an app today might become a part of the OS tomorrow. Seems like a reasonable way for things to progress.
Okay, I mean, I think I agree that some of that will happen, and but still, if we are applying some kind of a litmus test, that is this really part of the platform that is offering services to the top, then we can control the complexity or what goes into that platform, right? So, but you're right, I mean, some of that is unavoidable. Okay.
How are you going to maintain because you have the 3 months release, right? How do you maintain the stability of the API, like particularly northbound? If I build something on top of this ONOS API, and then released, is there any you do any regression or?
Good question. I don't have really an answer. I don't know whether Bill or.
Well, I think it's a really good question because the northbound interfaces are very immature still, and I think there's a lot of things we don't know that we don't know yet, right? And there's a lot of applications that are still going to be written to prove out some of that. So I think that for a while, much as we'd like it to be kind of solidified, it's going to be malleable, right? It's going to change, and at some point, when you start having real deployments, and we feel like some set of functionality is probably going to always be there, then we'll start versioning an interface. But we don't want to do that before we're ready to do that, right? So
maybe one way is proposed to ON.Lab, they are trying to stabilize on northbound API.
I mean, I think it's a fine line, right? Because defining an API too early will mean that we have the wrong API.
Yeah, I know that.
And so I think you have to prepare for malleability in the API. And my own preference would be for a de facto standard to emerge from experience rather than speccing it, because I think that's unnecessary particularly for an open source development. However, I think Bill had described a different model, which is get some experience and then have versions, and I think it's impossible to predict how different those versions will be with each other. We
Well,
can't mandate backward
maybe
compatibility. Right?
1 year or 2 years down the road, a lot of application already built, then if underlying operating system changes, or
Correct.
API changes, then maybe a problem.
But I think you probably understand the issue, right? Which is they may have been built and be very successful on an API that turns out to be the wrong one, right? And so, I think you just have to be mindful of the fact that it will be a while before that firms up.
And I guess I said that we have taken a baby step towards that by defining this application intent framework. So I would not say intent framework is like an API or anybody should standardize on that. That is not. But intent framework is trying to define kind of a framework, and it is an extensible thing. So as we are learning more and more and we are adding more use cases and application, there is an extensibility that is built into that framework. And we don't know how it's going to evolve, but at least that is a baby step that we have taken in defining that intent framework as a framework within which we want to do the northbound API work going forward, and use cases and all of that.
So I think one thing I wanted to add, so like you pointed out, right, for sure, we won't take API change lightly, but without sugarcoating, that is going to be the reality for next 1 year. What we can do is we can manage that better. So for instance, between releases, if there are API changes, we will try our best to put it out there maybe within a month of the initial start of the cycle, so you're sort of prepared for what's coming next. But of course, things might change last minute, but hopefully that's something we can stick to most of the time.
Following up, is there an intent that so to speak, that there will be a significance to the version numbers? For example, for ONOS version 1, is it expected that the API won't change drastically, and if it does, that would mean that we change the version number, so that there'd be like some coordination with that? I wasn't entirely listening to your answer, but.
Yeah, I think that is our intention, right? As you go from 1.0 to 2.0, right, you can expect major changes in APIs, possibly, right? But within 1.0 or within a 2.0, then, not so much.
And then another question, which maybe Tom or Ali can answer regarding that, is does the sort of Carafe framework allow you to potentially run different versions of a module simultaneously, like the way OSGI and Spring does, which is occasionally a nice feature if you want to support like 2 different versions of a library for running 2 different applications and sort of avoid the problem of DLL hell or shared library hell that plagues Windows and Linux.
Yes. I think to answer your question, I think in Carafe you can load 2 modules, load simultaneously. I think you can. I think you can load one module, one version. You can unload that module and load another one load the same one with another version. You probably can't. You shouldn't load the same module of both versions simultaneously because it just doesn't make sense, right?
Well, it might make sense if they were if they were compatible on the same kernel and use the same underlying subsystem. So it might. So I guess the answer is maybe, but hopefully. But I mean, hopefully we'll be able to avoid this problem.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask the same question because Bob had an interesting question. So how about if I want to run a different version of the same module on a different ONOS instance within the same cluster?
Maybe this is too technical to take offline. So let me see, because we are going to run out of time very soon, so I want to make sure, okay.
I think this is a question for Nick. This morning in your talk, I thought you said that you think that standards are going to go away and become irrelevant. Could you elaborate on that? Because I'm not sure I understood you.
I don't think I said that this morning. After a few drinks, I may have said that in the past. No, actually, I don't think they're going to go away and become irrelevant. I think what I may perhaps more diplomatically said, I think they will have diminished value. And I think that is actually, and that's more in keeping with what I actually believe, is that wherever, what is a protocol? A protocol is an agreed upon set of rules between 2 communicating parties. And in order for that to happen, you've got to have an agreed upon set of rules. So where you've got different parties communicating with each other across boundaries, for example, BGP, it would be hard to think how the internet could have come about without something like BGP, right? You need an agreed upon set of rules. However, if you're two Google servers talking to each other, you don't necessarily need an externally agreed upon set of rules. Right? And so now so many pieces of software, devices are communicating privately, then the agreed upon set of rules could be a private and local decision. And there are so many things that are local and private decisions today that are just dictated by software practice. And so I think that they will naturally come about by what makes sense locally. So it just means that there will be fewer places where we need to define the standards. It'll still be important to have them. However, my guess is that with something like ONOS and with the open source effort in general, that you'll start to see people develop alternatives even to BGP. Right? We're seeing this happen with the software-defined exchange points and things like that, where people will look at alternative ways in which to peer. I think this is great, wonderful. It's innovation, experimentation, and there's no particular reason that exchanging prefixes based on some policy is the right way to do it. And it's good to establish whether alternative approaches that make sense. So I think it's possible, even in those areas, we will see local agreements across peering boundaries. I don't know. I think it's too early to tell. But that's why I think it'll be less important. They'll have diminished value.
So this is Mark. One thing to think about when you say standards too is right now there's a tension between open source and standards, open source development models and standards, because typically standards are created by groups, done confidentially, tend to be slow moving, tend to require consensus. That's very, very different from the open source development model. And so as you think of, and I'm working with a couple of organizations, they're trying to understand how these two things, well, frankly, from transitioning to a more standards-based to more open source development model. So whenever you say standards, I think it's also important to remember that the open source approach to development and product creation is quite different from the standards-based one. And you have to be careful not to import standard-based expectations in open source.
Very good point.
Anything else? Folks, we're going to run out of time, so if you have anything on your mind that you didn't speak up and we didn't give you a chance to speak up because we have so much crammed on schedule, this is the time. No?
We don't have a community web page that you can post comments on.
Oh yeah, of course. So there are already ONOS discuss, ONOS announce. Those are mailing lists on which we can have a discussion about ONOS.
And we also just set up ask.onosproject.com.
Okay, ask ONOS. Right.
All these links should be on the wiki. So wiki should be or on our website. It's like a one-stop shop for all information.
Okay, so I guess maybe this is time to kind of conclude. So I should tell you what our expectations are over the next 1 month or so. So you will, every company or every company that participated today, you will get an email from me saying, of course, thanking and all of you and wanting to understand your feedback as well as how you want to move forward. And the expectation is in mid-January or so, we are going to kind of officially launch open source ONOS project with hopefully, obviously all the existing partners, and hopefully there will be a few more partners joining. And so in the back of your mind, you should think about mid-January or that type of a deadline if you are wanting to join the open source ONOS project and so on. So with that, I think let us conclude. Thank you all for coming and participating. And if I don't interact with you, happy holidays, and you will definitely hear from me sometime before and after the holidays. Okay? Thank you.